He woke up earlier than usual on that chilly morning in Elkwood, Alabama. The clock still read 5:42 a.m. when Benjamin Hall, a 91-year-old Korean War veteran, pulled on his old wool sweater and worn shoes and trudged down the 2 porch steps with a sack of food in his hands. He said nothing, not even to himself. He just walked to the front door, where with stiff, trembling fingers he tied the small bundle to the doorknob. Then he took a piece of yellowed tape and taped on it the note he had written moments earlier, in the handwriting of someone who had fought in more wars than he cared to remember. "If I don't come back, take care of him for me. He's all I have." Milo, his senior mongrel with a white muzzle and loyal eyes, was there. He sat silently, as if he sensed something important was happening. His tail wagged slowly, as if trying to comfort him. Benjamin stared at him for a few seconds. And then, without warning, he felt the crack in his chest, dry, sharp, like a nail driven under his ribs. The pain made him lose his balance for a moment, but he held onto the door frame, closed his eyes, and took a deep breath. He didn't want to fall. Not yet. Not until that note was visible. Because more than any medal, more than all the letters he had saved from the war, what really mattered now was Milo, the friend who gave him a reason to get out of bed. The silent companion on long, sleepless nights. The only soul who still waited for him with joy every time he returned from the market. Benjamin then dragged himself to the phone, dialed the emergency number with difficulty, and sat down on the kitchen chair, clutching his chest. The last thing he saw before he lost consciousness was Milo lying next to his boot, his head resting on his leg. Minutes later, the ambulance crossed the streets of the neighborhood in silence while the city was still asleep. The stretcher, the rush, the neighbors behind the curtains. Everything happened too quickly for anyone to notice the small detail attached to the door. The note was still there, shaky, almost erased by the morning humidity, but no one read it. Not then. And Milo was left, alone, sitting on the doorstep, staring at the gate, waiting for Benjamin to come back. He didn't cry. He didn't bark. He just waited, as if this were just another day when the old man would come back with a newspaper under his arm and a bone in his bag. But there was something different that day. A heavier silence, a slower tempo, and a notice pinned to the door that until then no one had noticed. It was only late in the afternoon that fate decided to act. A mother was in a hurry returning from school with her son when the boy stopped and pointed to the light blue door. "Mum, there's a piece of paper over there, and a dog." She walked over and read it. Once, then again. And finally, he put his hand to his mouth as if he had read something he shouldn't have. He took a photo, hesitated, and posted it in the neighborhood residents group. She didn't know it, but that simple action would set in motion a chain of gestures that no one expected. Not even Benjamin. "Stay with me because what this note triggered will move you." And the response that this neighborhood gave was much greater than anyone could have imagined. The news began as a timid whisper among the neighborhood group messages, a blurry photo, a short caption, and a heavy silence in the reactions. Carol didn't know exactly what she had done, but something inside her told her that the note pinned to the door wasn't just a request, it was a cry. A cry written with the trembling hands of someone who knew what it meant to have lost everything and didn't want to lose it again. That same night, the group was restless. No one could stop thinking about the dog, and no one really knew the name of the man in the blue house, although everyone had seen him once or twice walking slowly down the sidewalk with that old dog trotting beside him. A man with firm steps, a distant look in his eyes, and a worn military cap that he wore even on hot days. Always silent, always alone. But now suddenly everyone cared, and that hurt. Meanwhile, Milo was still there, in the same place, sitting in front of the closed door, as if his entire world was trapped behind that doorknob. Sometimes he would growl softly at the wind. Other times he would just sigh. During the early morning, the temperature dropped sharply. The dog, whose fur was already thinning due to age, began to shiver. He tried to curl up in a corner of the porch, where a little of Benjamin's scent still lingered. But the scent was getting weaker and weaker, and he could feel it. The next morning, 2 young women showed up. One of them, a neighbor from the back street, had brought a package of dog food still unopened and an old blanket. But she hesitated to go in. The other, a young woman with a backpack on her shoulders, watched Milo with teary eyes. He didn't growl. He just looked at them, with a strange calmness and a tail that wagged slowly without strength. They left the food, the blanket, and left. But before leaving, they took another photo, this time with the dog lying next to the note. The image went viral in the neighborhood itself. And then the trials began. How come no one knew he lived alone? How could they let a 91-year-old man live without support? This isn't just about a dog. This is about abandonment. That sentence became a spark, and the spark became a fire. That afternoon, 3 residents decided to take action. They knocked on the door. No one answered. Benjamin was obviously still in the hospital, but Milo responded with a soft bark, dragging his body toward the crack in the gate. James, a retired electrician, went in and checked the place. Nothing seemed out of place except for the absence of the owner, the absence of everything that made the house alive. The yard was covered in dry leaves. The water bowl was empty. The food bowl was overturned, and on the porch sofa, a dirty blanket where Milo spent hours without moving. That was when James noticed something. There were claw marks on the door, as if the dog in desperation had tried to get in. It was like a punch. The image of an animal trying to reach the man who had given it a new life, now gone, broke something inside him. That same night, James returned with 2 more friends. They brought food, a cooler with fresh water, and set up a makeshift camera with one of his daughter's old cell phones. They didn't know exactly what they were doing, but they knew they could no longer pretend nothing was happening. And as the neighborhood moved, albeit slowly, Benjamin struggled to keep his eyes open. At the hospital, his heartbeat was steady but low. He still hadn't woken up. A curious nurse had found a card in his pants pocket. It was old, worn, and written in pen, "If anything happens, please check the backyard. Milo will be there." That sentence made the nurse look at the old man differently. This man knew he was leaving. And yet, his biggest concern wasn't him. It was the dog. The next day, the most powerful image emerged. Harold, the carpenter, arrived early. He watched Milo trying to climb the 3 steps to the porch and giving up halfway. He would try once, twice, and on the 3rd, he would wince in pain. His hind legs no longer obeyed as they had before. Harold said nothing. He simply went back home, got the boards he used for repairs, and in a few hours had built a simple ramp with pieces of carpet glued on top. When he was done, he whistled. Milo stood up slowly, walked to the ramp and climbed effortlessly. When he reached the top, he turned. He stopped. He looked at Harold. And in that look there was no fear, no distrust. There was something deeper, like recognition. From then on, what was once a one-off care became a mission. Neighbors began taking turns. Carol, the woman who started it all, organized a schedule in a school notebook. Children began writing letters. A group of teenagers painted a colorful sign that read, "Caring for the warrior's friend," and no one needed to knock on the door for help anymore. The front gate was always ajar, as if the house had understood that it needed to accept that movement. From the hospital, Benjamin still didn't know anything, but his breathing was improving, still weak but steady, and something inside him seemed calmer. It's as if, even unconsciously, he felt that Milo was no longer alone. Comment here. This is bigger than it looks. If this story also touched you, now let's continue this journey one layer deeper, because what happens next will transform not just Benjamin's life, but the entire neighborhood's. Night fell silent over Elkwood, and with it came a sharp wind that beat against the windows of the houses, making the trees groan in agony. On the porch of the blue house, Milo continued to keep watch, not with the energy of a young dog, but with the patience of someone who has already understood that love sometimes requires waiting. He remained lying by the door, his head lowered on his front paws, his eyes fixed on the gate, as if at some point Benjamin would come back through it, as he did every afternoon after his walk, even when tired, even when silent. Inside the house, everything remained as he had left it. The kettle still with cold water on the stove, the blanket on the sofa still with the outline of his body. A pair of glasses on the newspaper, resting on the previous day's headline, "Temperatures plummet in the south of the state," and no voice, no presence, no footsteps. It was Kyle who first noticed, through the makeshift camera, that Milo was beginning to waste away, not with visible wounds, but with the kind of pain that consumes you from within, the absence that can't be explained, the silence that hurts. The dog barely ate. He barked only once a day around the same time, as if he were calling Benjamin. And then he would lie down again, head turned toward the street, ignoring whatever was happening around him, as if the world no longer made any sense. That morning, a storm arrived without warning. Gusts of wind blew leaves and branches across the street as if the neighborhood were being tested. One of the neighbors, Miguel, ran to Benjamin's porch with a blue tarp and tied it over the open part. He found Milo huddled under the newly built ramp, shivering. His eyes, once hopeful, were now dull. Michael knelt before him and held out his hand. Milo didn't growl. He didn't react either. He simply allowed the touch, a rare gesture from a dog accustomed to only one hand in the world, his owner's. Meanwhile, at the hospital, Benjamin was unconscious. The machines indicated stability, but his expression remained tense, as if he were fighting something internal. And he was. His body was weakening, but there was a greater force that kept him there, the urge to return, not to himself, but to Milo. The next day, something changed. At dawn, there was a box on the porch. Inside it were used toys, various snacks, and dozens of little letters, all written by children from the neighborhood, simple sentences, scribbled with colored markers. "You are a good boy. Your owner will return. We are with you." Milo sniffed the box. He touched his nose to the papers. He sat down next to it, and there he stayed, as if that gesture had given him back some of his energy. And without anyone noticing, the little town began to change, subtly, but really. People who had never exchanged words began to meet on the sidewalk in front of the Blue House. Some offered help, others brought stories. There were even those who confessed that they had never had the courage to approach the veteran. And now, suddenly, they missed him. At the hospital, a nurse named Lillian decided to break protocol. After seeing one of the photos shared on the local group, she printed out a picture of Milo lying down with the letters next to him and stuck it on the visitor's bulletin board right above Benjamin's bedside. And then something surprising happened. During the shift change, one of the nurses swore he saw the veteran's fingers move slightly when the picture was adjusted. Others said it was a coincidence. But Lillian didn't believe in coincidences. The next morning, she decided to go further. She took out her phone, showed him a more recent photo of Milo, now being fed by a little girl with curly hair, and said softly close to his ear, "Your best friend is being taken care of, and he is waiting for you to return." A tear fell, alone, almost imperceptible, but there, and it changed everything. Benjamin began to show signs of recovery, slowly, as if he were returning from a faraway place. The doctors were still cautious, but Lillian knew it wasn't just the medicine at work. It was the bond, the invisible connection between a man and his dog, and also between a man and an entire neighborhood that, until then, had seemed numb to its own routines. Back at home, a new problem arose. Some neighbors noticed that the gate was starting to rust. James, who had old tools from his time in the service, decided to fix it. He didn't ask for help. But by the end of the day, they were all there, each with a screwdriver, an idea, an extra screw. And it wasn't about the gate anymore. It was about belonging, about being part of something real, authentic. That's when Harold, the same one who made the ramp, raised his voice for the first time in the group. "We should think bigger. This isn't just about this dog. It's about all the elderly people who live like Benjamin, alone, invisible, afraid to leave and leave someone behind." No one responded immediately, but the seeds had been sown. The hospital called 2 days later. The voice on the other end of the line was calm but firm. "He's awake," and he asked for news of the dog. Comment here. Those who care never forget. If this kind of story also touches something deep inside you, and there's more. What happens when Benjamin and Milo meet again is one of those scenes that changes the way we see life. The sky in Elkwood looked different that afternoon. There was no sun or storm, just a soft grey hovering over the houses, as if time itself were suspended, waiting for something. Milo, now with easy access by the newly installed ramp, climbed up onto the porch effortlessly for the first time in days. And there, in silence, he lay down exactly where he usually lay next to Benjamin, as if trying to keep alive the smell, the memory, the connection that time insisted on cooling. Across town, in a hospital room, Benjamin was still unable to speak. But he kept doing an almost involuntary movement. With his right hand, he ran his thumb over the small metal star attached to the cord around his neck. It was an old medal, its edges worn and its name partially erased. To many it seemed like just a forgotten military item. But to him it was a silent reminder of promises that should never be broken, especially the one that said, "Never abandon someone who once trusted you with their life." Outside, in the neighborhood, more children appeared. Some brought letters drawn with colored pencils. Others came just to watch Milo from afar, as if his presence were a lesson that could not be explained with words. Harold, the carpenter, now stopped by every afternoon. He didn't say much, but he always left something discreet. A leather bone, a clean bowl, a small sign with the words, "Friend of the Warrior," written on it, which he carefully nailed to the side of the door. The strangest thing was that no one had planned it. There was no meeting, no announcement. But day after day, the sidewalk in front of the Blue House became a point of convergence, as if, suddenly, everyone was learning to see not only the abandoned dog, but also the weight of silence that Benjamin had always carried. Meanwhile, inside the hospital, a new nurse had arrived on the scene. Her name was Grace. She was young, but with a look that seemed to pierce through a patient's armor. She had heard about the case and asked to take care of him. On her second visit, she noticed something. Benjamin was not responding to commands, but when she said the name Milo, his fingers would tighten slightly on the sheets. It wasn't strength. It was muscle memory. It was his body saying what his voice couldn't yet. It was then that Grace made a decision that would change everything. She photographed the mural of notes and drawings that now adorned the porch of the Blue House and took it with her to the hospital. The next day, she printed the image on photo paper, put it in a plain envelope and left it next to her pillow. And without saying a word, she just stood there, waiting. A few hours later, when he returned to the room, the photo was no longer in the envelope. It was between Benjamin's fingers, very close to his chest. For the first time in days, he was breathing with less effort, and a smile, albeit shy, almost invisible, appeared on his dry lips. In the Blue House, something was also changing. Now there were flowers planted in front of the porch. Pots of food were organized on improvised shelves. Even a small sign reading, "Caution, Honor Dog on Duty," was placed on the gate. A symbolic gesture, but one filled with a respect the neighborhood had never shown before. And in the middle of it all, Milo, firm, present, as if he understood that something was about to change. On the morning of the fourth day, Carol, the woman who started it all, received a call from the hospital. It was a cheerful, almost laughing voice. He woke up, and the first thing he asked was to know if Milo was okay. It was as if the entire neighborhood held its breath at that moment. The news spread from house to house, and soon the most anticipated image arrived. Benjamin, still frail, sitting in a wheelchair in the hospital hallway, holding the photo from the mural with both hands. In the background, the children's poster with the words, "We are taking care of your best friend, come back soon." He didn't cry, but his eyes shone with a depth that not even time could erase. And even the most experienced nurses admitted there was something about this scene that defied medical logic. It was more than physical recovery. It was connection. It was purpose. Upon learning that he would be returning home soon, Benjamin made a single request. "Take a letter from me to the porch. I want him to know I'm coming back." He wrote with difficulty but firmly, "My friend, just hold on a little longer. I'm on my way. You've been my soldier this far, and now it's my turn to come back for you. With honor, Ben." The letter was delivered the same day, and Milo, When he sniffed the envelope, he let out his first firm bark in almost a week. It wasn't crying, it wasn't pain, it was as if he knew, as if there was something inside him that science can't explain, but his heart recognizes. Write it down. I would have taken care of him too. If you also believe that loyalty cannot be taught, it must be proven, because what Benjamin will find when he crosses the gate of the Blue House goes far beyond what he could ever imagine. The white hospital van slowly turned the corner onto Maple Street, crossing the same path that Benjamin had walked so many times, his military cap on his head, and Milo trotting beside him like a faithful shadow. But now the old veteran was returning with a different posture, his shoulders still heavy, his eyes sunken, his body more fragile than it had ever been. Inside the vehicle, he clutched tightly the letter he had written days before. His bony fingers trembled, not only from the exhaustion of his hospital stay, but from something greater, the uncertainty of being reunited. As he passed through the iron gate of the Blue House, Benjamin still saw nothing. The wheelchair bounced slightly on the uneven ground, but he heard it. Muffled laughter, excited whispers, and then, suddenly, a bark. Not just any bark. A deep, rusty sound coming from deep in the throat. A bark that carried longing, fear, and relief all at once. Milo was there, sitting at the top of the ramp that Harold had built, a blue scarf tied around his neck. His eyes were moist, fixed on the man who to him was the whole world. As soon as Benjamin saw him, he couldn't hold back. He put his hand to his chest, as if to hold his heart in place. "My good boy." The nurse slowly pushed the chair to the bottom of the ramp. Milo hesitated. One step, another, one more, and then he ran. As best he could, as if he were young again. He jumped into Benjamin's lap with an awkward leap, knocking off his military hat and licking his face desperately. The old man tried to speak, but he only cried. He cried like he had never cried before, not even when he buried his wife. He cried like someone who had returned from war for the second time, not from an enemy country, but from a cold hospital bed where the minutes dragged by without meaning. Meanwhile, the neighbors, gathered discreetly on the sidewalk, watched everything in silence, some with their hands on their chests, others with tears in their eyes. That reunion was more than a return. It was a revelation. It was the moment when everyone realized that they had been part of something much bigger than they imagined. And then Carol approached. With a shy smile, she handed Benjamin a blue folder. Inside were all the letters written by the children, the notes stuck on the door, the photos of Milo being cared for, fed, loved, and at the end, a handwritten invitation. "Mr. Hall, we would like to count on you for a new project, because no one should fight alone." Benjamin read slowly. He took a deep breath, and in a hoarse voice he answered, "I don't know if I'm still any good. But if it's to take care of those who take care, you can count on me." Milo settled into his lap as if approving, and the neighbors one by one began to approach. Some came with bowls of food, others with toys for the dog. There was even a neatly folded American flag brought by James, who had served in the same war, but had never had the courage to speak to Benjamin before. It was there on the porch of the Blue House that the first draft of what would become a movement was born. But before anything else, it was necessary to rebuild. Time had taken away strength, health, and almost hope. But now there was something new in the air, a sense of belonging, that each gesture had taken root, and those roots were ready to grow. That night, Benjamin didn't sleep in bed. He preferred to stay in the rocking chair on the porch, with Milo by his side. The dog, already lying down, would occasionally raise his head to check if his owner was still there. He was, silent but present, like someone who understands that sometimes all someone needs is to know that they haven't been forgotten. On the sidewalk in front, hanging from the lamppost, there was a new poster, Companionship Project for Companions, a care network for veterans and their animals. It was still just an idea, but the idea already had a name, support, and purpose. The most impressive thing is that it had all started with a note, written with trembling hands stuck to a cold door, and now that fragile gesture was remembered as the starting point of a transformation. "Write it down. I believe in this care network. if you also think that no one should face old age or loneliness without a friendly shoulder. And what Benjamin didn't know yet is that his story was about to inspire more than one neighborhood. It was about to cross borders. The wheelchair stopped right in front of the porch, and Benjamin, his hand resting on the iron armrest, slowly looked up. What he saw was no longer his old house. It was a symbol. The windows, once closed and dusty, now had new curtains sewn by a resident of the block. The floor of the porch had been meticulously cleaned, and all around on the steps and walls there was something that left Benjamin speechless. Dozens of notes, letters, dried flowers carefully pinned with colorful pins, and a makeshift mural with photos of Milo next to dozens of people Benjamin had never met, until now. He tried to say something, but his voice failed him. He raised a trembling hand to his face and covered his eyes, overcome by a wave of emotion that no battlefield had ever caused. That silence broken only by the pent-up breaths around him, that collective respect. It was the kind of tribute that men like him never expect to receive in life. Milo, faithful as ever, was already lying down next to the chair. He looked at his owner with eyes that mixed relief and protection, as if to say, "I held the fort until you got back." And it was at that moment that a boy with glasses and a yellow t-shirt, with bare feet and messy hair, walked up to Benjamin holding an envelope. Without ceremony, he held out his hands and said with the frankness that only children have, "You became the reason for all this to exist." Benjamin carefully picked up the envelope. Inside was an identification badge with his name on it, Benjamin Hall, volunteer advisor, and then a simple document printed on a plain sheet of paper. On it, an outline of a community project. The name was in large, underlined letters, Company for Companions. The text explained, a local initiative to provide support for elderly people who live alone with their pets, emotional support, food, transportation to clinics, regular visits, all voluntary, all born from that photo, that note, that dog, and that veteran forgotten for so long. Benjamin looked at the boy and tried to smile. The gesture was restrained but genuine, and before he could respond, a detail caught his attention. In the bottom corner of the envelope, taped together with tape, was a small military uniform button. He recognized it immediately. It was the same as the one he had lost in 1954 on a night patrol in the Korean mountains. He never knew where it had fallen, but someone had found one just like it and placed it there as a souvenir. No one knew it, but Benjamin carried in the inside pocket of his coat something he had never shown anyone since returning from the war. An aged piece of paper, folded into 4 parts. It was a handwritten letter from his wife Ruth in 1962, when he was temporarily serving as an instructor at a base in Nevada. In the letter, Ruth said, "If one day everything seems dark, Ben, look at what you've built. Not every hero is remembered, but you were always mine." He didn't need to take the letter out of his pocket. It was enough to know it was still there. But for the first time in years, he felt that Ruth would have been proud of him and of what this neighborhood had become. At that moment, Carol appeared on the porch with a clipboard in her hands. A line was forming behind her. Neighbors, young and old, some with pets in their arms, others just wanting to help. Everyone wanted to sign up for the project. Everyone wanted to be a part of it. And then she said, "Mr. Hall, the first meeting will be right here, on your balcony. Do you accept?" He took a deep breath. He looked around, the mural, the flowers, the shy smiles, the outstretched hands. Milo at his side, like a silent sergeant on guard. And he just nodded, unable to say anything else. But what no one there knew was that that gesture on that balcony would be recorded by someone who was driving by and saw the commotion. A local journalist. He stopped, took discreet photos, and posted the story on a small blog with the caption, "The veteran who saved the neighborhood," and was saved by it. The post went viral in less than 24 hours. Schools in other cities began sending letters. A Birmingham dog shelter offered free support to volunteers. A pet food company pledged to donate food, and a state senator, upon reading the story, sent a public statement thanking the dog for his example of resilience, humanity, and quiet love. And the most unexpected was yet to come. Comment here. Being remembered is a kind of healing, if you also believe that care can start with a simple gesture, because what happened to Benjamin after that tribute would still touch thousands of people for a reason no one expected. It was late afternoon in Elkwood, with golden light filtering through the leaves of the trees, that time of day when shadows grow longer and everything seems calmer, more real. On the porch of the Blue House, Benjamin sat in his wheelchair with Milo nestled in his lap. The dog slept peacefully, as if he had finally completed a mission. But Benjamin did not. He watched intently the activity in front of him, a small tent being set up, a table with coffee and muffins brought by a lady from the street behind, and a group of young people adjusting easels where posters with photos, drawings and action plans would soon be hung. It was the first official meeting of the company for companions. The transformation was underway, but inside Benjamin there was another battle going on, a silent, intimate one. He felt honored, of course. It touched him deeply to see so many people involved because of a simple gesture of his. But he also felt fear of not being able to keep up, of not being useful, of no longer being up to the task of what was being built in his name. For decades, he had lived in survival mode. Now for the first time he felt challenged to live in presence mode. Carol noticed his distant gaze and approached. She knelt down beside the chair and spoke softly. "You don't have to lead. You just have to stay who you are." He tried to smile, but his eyes were watery. He ran his hand over Milo's head and whispered, "I didn't know there was still room for me in the world." She replied, "The world is fairer when we make room for those who have always held the fort in silence." Weekly meetings began to take place right there on the porch. Elderly people from the city, who had never spoken to each other before, began to share stories. Some cried as they remembered animals they had owned and lost without anyone to turn to for help. Others smiled as they saw their names included on the volunteer sheets. For the first time, they were being seen not as burdens, but as pillars of a new model of care. One of these meetings had an unexpected twist. A man named Rufus, who always passed by with a suspicious look, approached slowly with a small dog in his arms, skinny with matted fur, clearly neglected. Benjamin recognized him from afar. Rufus had served with him in the same division, but life had separated them. There were old grudges between them. Nothing said, everything felt. Seeing his old companion there, with his eyes lowered and the dog trembling in his lap, Benjamin did something no one expected. He extended his hand. "You arrived on time." Rufus looked up and in a choked voice replied, "You gave me an excuse to leave the house." That silent and powerful reconciliation left a deep impression on everyone who was there, and it showed that the project was not just about pets. It was about bridges, about rescuing what the rush of life had left behind. But the impact still went beyond the borders of Elkwood. Reports were pouring in. Universities began to study the care model that had spontaneously emerged in the neighborhood. A Canadian NGO asked for permission to replicate the project with veterans in Toronto, and a popular late-night TV show aired a primetime special titled "The Man and the Dog Who Taught a Country to Look at the Invisible." Benjamin watched in silence. Milo lay beside him. When the news report ended, the presenter said something that stuck in everyone's mind. Sometimes the greatest heroes are remembered not for the wars they won, but for the lives they saved after the battle. The next morning, Benjamin received an official letter. It was from the National Department of Veterans Affairs. The content was brief but weighty. In recognition of Mr. Benjamin Hall for representing what is most dignified in the civilian life of a veteran, care, courage, and compassion. Attached to the letter was an invitation to speak at an annual event on aging and citizenship. Benjamin smiled as he read it, but his response was simple. "I prefer to talk from my balcony." And it was there, from the chair he had occupied so long in silence, that he began to share ideas, give advice, and inspire new community leaders. Every Saturday at 10 a.m. sharp, he would speak a few words while Milo stood by, like a long-time partner in a mission. One day, a little girl named Ellie, about 7 years old, approached the end of a meeting. Wearing a beaded necklace and a folded sheet of notebook paper, she said, "Mr. Hall, I made this for you and Milo." It was a simple but moving drawing, two dolls holding hands, a smiling dog, and the phrase written in crooked letters, "You saved our neighborhood." Benjamin didn't answer. He just put the paper in his coat pocket, in the same place where he always carried Ruth's letter. Write it down. Being seen changes everything. If you also believe that a gesture can rebuild bonds and give new meaning to life. If you've come this far, it's because this story touched you in some way. Maybe you also know someone like Mr. Benjamin. Someone who lives a quiet life with few words, but who carries a world inside his chest, and who sometimes just needs a simple gesture to believe in people again. If this video reminded you of someone special, or simply made you take a deep breath, leave a like here. It helps us continue telling stories that really matter. And if you felt this message was for you, write it in the comments. I saw it through to the end, and I took it with me. Subscribe to the channel if you want more stories like this, made calmly with soul, and that always leave us with something to think about. And hey, there's a video here on the side that continues along the same lines. Click and come with me. There's more good stuff to experience together.